Hello everyone. Now we will see the notes of Fernhill. If you did not subscribe my channel, please subscribe for more videos. Shall we start today's notes? Introduction. Fernhill, poem by Dylan Thomas that evokes the joy and the inevitable loss of world of childhood. It was first published in 1946 in his collection Deaths and Entrances. Fernhill is narrated by nature poet who reflects systematically on the delights of childhood and its symbiotic relationship with the natural world, on the adolescence, nascent sexuality, and ultimately on the loss of childhood, innocence, and realization of morality. Avoiding sentimentality, Thomas created both the celebration and an elegy in the well known lines: "Who, as I was young and easy in the mercy of his means, time held me green and dying through, though I sang in my chains." Shall we see about poet Dylan Thomas? Thomas in full Dylan Marilas Thomas, Welsh poet and prose written writer whose work is known for its comic ex- exuberance, phasodic literature, and pathos. His personal life, punctuated by reckless doubts by drinking, was notorious. Thomas spent his childhood in southwestern Wales. His father taught English at the Swansea Language Grammar School, which in due course the boy attended. Thomas' first book, 18 Poems, appeared in 1934 and it announced a strikingly new and individual, if not always comprehensible, voice in English poetry. Thomas basically made London his home for some 10 years from about 1936. He had become famous in literary circle. The poet collected in Deaths and Entrances 1946 show a greater lucidity and confirm Thomas as a religious poet. This book reveals an advance in sympathy and understanding due, in part to the impact of World War II and to the depending harmony between poet and his Welsh environment, for he writes gradually in a mode of reconciliation and acceptance. He often adopts a bardic tone and it is a true romantic and claiming a high, almost priest like function for the poet. He also makes extensive use of Christian myth and symbolism, often sounds a note of formal ritual and incantation in his poem. The recreation of childhood experiences produce a visionary, mystical poetry in which the landscapes of youth and infants assume the holiness of first Eden for Thomas' childhood with its intimation of morality. Fernhill reveals an advance in sympathy and understanding due in part to the impact of World War II and to the deepening harmony between the poet and his Welsh environment, for he writes generally in a mood of reconciliation and acceptance. He often adopts a bardic tone and is a true romantic in climbing high and almost priest like function for the poet. He also makes extensive use of Christian myth and symbolism and often sounds a note of formal ritual and incantation in his poems. The recreation of childhood experiences produce a visionary mystical poet in which the landscape of youth and infancy assume the holiness of the first Eden of Thomas' childhood and its intimations of immorality in a state of innocence and grace. But the rhapsodic literature and the music of the later wars derives from a complex technical discipline, so that Thomas' absorption is a craft to produce verbal harmonics that are unique in English poetry. Meanwhile, the London or London based atmosphere became increasingly dangerous and unconscious both to the Thomas and his wife. The prose that Thomas wrote in is linked with his development as a poet, and his first stories included in The Map of Love and Prospect of the Sea 1955 are a byproduct of the early poetry. But in Portrait of the Artist as a Young Dog 1940, the half mythical Welsh landscapes of the early stories have been replaced by realistically and harmoniously. This poem begins with the speaker happily recounting spending time outside in the picturesque landscape with green grass, apple trees, and a starry sky where he felt like a prince. He detailed his adventure as a youth, recalling how he acted as a both a huntsman and herdsman, and saying that time allowed him to play in the sun once only. The first hint that his happiness won't last. Throughout the first three stanzas, the speaker continues to detail his adventure and their landscape. He rules his nature definition, referring to himself as Prince of the Apple Towns and famous among the bands, and it seems he alone is present in the natural world along with animals. In the second stanza, he expands own his adventure as a green and carefree boy. His greenness matching that of the landscape, he repeats the phrases time let me and golden in of his beginning with them as he died in the first stanza, as he did in the first stanza. In the third stanza, he continues to elaborate on the landscape, getting taught, caught up in his descriptions as he lists the thing after magical thing, beginning several lines with the ant. In the fourth stanza, he compares witnessing the coming of the day to Adam and Eve in Eden Garden, God creating the universe. The next stanza begins the poem ending tone of regret, alluding the paid piper as the speaker begins with the phrase nothing I cared to criticizes himself as needless, indicating his later regret. The speaker ends the poem laminating his carelessness and mourning the loss of his childhood and innocence, beginning the stanza by repeating the phrase nothing I cared from the previous stanza. Analysis personifying the litting house at the start of the poem acts the stage for the landscape the speaker described. It is so living and vivid that is almost a character itself. Time is similarly personified, becoming almost like a playmate to the young boy. Thomas uses the phrase once below a time, emphasizes the port of time. The speaker is merely a guest in time's domain and instantly reminds us of fairy tales beginning once upon a time, calling to mind stories of childhood innocence. The line, in the sun that is young once only, in the second stanza is a first hint that the speaker's joyful innocence won't last. Though time lets him play, it remains in control. In the second stanza, he also mentions the Sadat and holy water, marking the first of many Christian references that will grow richer as the poem progressive and giving Fernhill. The colors green and gold, which will becoming recurring images, also appear. The third stanza continues the celebration of Fernhill as the speaker recalls the beauty of both days and nights at Fernhill. It's a simple recollection of Fernhill. It was air is telling. Air is, of course, measure of for life, but also invisible and easy to take for granted. Just as the young narrator doesn't fully appreciate Fernhill, the poem's images become more abstract and dreamy, such as the vague adjectives lovely and watery and the unnatural green fire. Again, green is used to mean full of life. In the fourth stanza, the Christian imagery deepens dramatically. Sacred aura. Invoking Adam and maiden, the speaker conjures the image of the biblical paradise of Eden, a comparison that becomes explicit in the fourth stanza. This comparison adds to the earlier hint that the speaker's happiness at Fernhill will end. After all, Adam and Eve are eventually exiled from Eden. He also mentions the creation of its aftermath, the birth of the simple light, the fields themselves seems to praise God, and the stable is personified, waning. Notably, he mentions the color white, often associated with purity. This is Adam and Eve before the fall. In the fifth stanza, Thomas continues to retry personification as the speaker describes the gay house and his wishes that raised again, emphasizing how alive the landscape of Fernhill feels. But all of this must end as the children follow time out of grace, a reference to the Christian concept of God's grace, the love and mercy that allows for salvation despite one's sin. The image also alludes to children following the Pied Piper, a figure from the German legend, who led the town's children away with this magical pipe. The sun, previously described as young, only once he is now born over and over, and the clouds are new made. But the renewal of natural landscape experiences is inaccessible to the child. By the sixth stanza, the speaker is forever cast out of Eden, waking up to the remember what he has lost and realizing that he is dying. Again, his previous days are described. Innocence and purity. His previous days are described as white, characterized as a time of innocence and purity. Now, how it feels to be young. The theme of Fernhill is how it feels to have been young. Writer writes William York Tyndall, but art at once in time and out of it, a tense great evader and destroyer. Fernhill is Thomas' victory over what he laments. The green and golden joy of childhood and the shadow sorrow of materiality become the joy of art. In this manner, the loss of time is not total. It is possible to use art to recapture the happiness of innocent youth. Fernhill is a poem by renounced 20th century Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. Thomas reminisces about the happy summer days he spent as a child at his aunt's farm. He felt in incomplete harmony with his natural surroundings, and it seemed as if his joy would never end. A teenage of melancholy, however, appearance towards the end of the poem, and an adult looking back, the poet knows what he did not know as a child. Those idyllic, joyful days could not last forever due to the restlessness march of time relentless march of time. They are gone and will never return, although the memory of them remains sweet. The poem consists of six 9 line stanza. In stanza 1, the speaker remembers the happy summer days he spent as a child at his own house, his aunt's house. He recalls starry nights in the valley in which the farm stood and the apple trees. The speaker recalls how carefree he was in that time. He loved the barn and the yard and regarded the farm as home. He enjoyed playing, and it seemed those days would never end. He remembers the tall hay fields and how he would fall asleep listening to the hooting of the owls. All night along he heard the calls of the night jar, a nocturnal bird. When he wakes, there is morning dew and the sound of the cock crowing. It was a kind of paradise. He continues the evocation of an idyllic childhood, but the last 3 lines acknowledge that it could not last forever. He describes the working of time. The speaker did not realize it at time, but now he knows that the joys of childhood had to end. Conclusion. Fernhill, a work by Thomas because of its creativity and religious concept. It symbolizes the awakening into maturity. Like Adam and Eve, the child awakens after the fall or maturity to a new world. Adam and Eve are people depicted in the Christian Bible. In the story of Genesis, they are exiled from the Garden of Eden because they broke faith with God and innocence was removed. The adult world is not as carefree as that of childhood, and the speaker experiences a sense of regret and the loss he has moved from one to other. Time has betrayed him. This betrayal is indicated by the placing of the cock on his shoulder. A cock is another name for the rooster and is an allusion to the betrayal of Jesus. If you like my videos, please subscribe for more videos. Thank you.